excited to have you as a guest, and I'm looking forward to some wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
An absolute pleasure.
Deb, I know that you are famously reluctant to talk about yourself, but I am going to ask you to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you arrived where you are and a little bit about your background.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Sally. Yeah, I'm not great at talking about myself, I think, but I suppose in some respects I do have an interesting story to tell. So I'm a born and bred South African, grew up here, and I started my career in HR. I very much almost fell into HR by, well, almost in a way, not by design. I definitely favored the idea of pursuing a career in business, but I had an aptitude for the people side of things. And what was very interesting for me was I started my career at Deloitte, and I spent a few years both in consulting and then in-house in HR in Deloitte. And I got a real taste for what HR could do for business, and how it could really shape amazing outcomes. But at the same time, I was young and inexperienced and wanting to travel the world and see things. I was working on a project actually out of our New York office for a while, and I got a bug for wanting to be able to travel, but I wanted to really experience new markets. I was very curious to experience beyond the world of financial services, beyond the world of professional services, and I wanted to therefore just go and spread my wings. So I spent certainly 11 years in the UK with General Electric, which was, I think, really for me quite career defining. Because at the time, I found my way into GE in an HR specialist role. And why that was so interesting was that at the time, GE was really a cornerstone of what HR was at the cutting edge, where we were going with enabling business and winning outcomes. The people and the financial components of a business were really the most influential in driving business outcomes. And GE very much valued their people and was very progressive in terms of people practices. So I spent 11 years there, and in that time I moved from specialist roles into generalist roles, and I just I had some amazing experience. What I loved about that environment was that every single role I did was vastly different, and the one common theme that I think would hang all of my experience together was I went in largely with a blank slate. And I was never there as an HR paper pusher. I never did what we referred to in South Africa many years ago as personnel management. I never filled in forms and that kind of thing. I obviously had the benefit in the early 2000s of entering a global organization that was very digital at the time, and very much investing in digital solutions. So having access to data, having access to dashboards, having access to digitized process was something I just thought was completely normal. And it freed me up to be able to play a business advisory role. And I suppose quite importantly from that experience, what it taught me was that you can be great in HR if you understand the business. And I really invested a lot of time and effort going out into the field, understanding the markets that we were in, and really exploring the commercial side of the business, what was going to make us money, what wasn't, and so that I could speak credibly about the environment that I was ultimately there to enable. So really exciting. And then I came back to South Africa, and did that in a little over 10 years ago, and landed in the banking sector in South Africa, which was a little bit like a rude awakening, because I discovered that the world of HR was manual. It was very archaically process orientated, very inefficient, and very, very full of people. So I went from having small lead HR teams working for me in a global context, and then coming back to South Africa and finding we had these large amounts of people having to do what digital could achieve for us. So I did have, as I say, a bit of a rude bump and down to earth, but have made my way through a number of financial services environments, and more recently landed up at Nedbank, where I now head up the people practice. And it is a huge privilege to have this role. First of all, it's an amazing organization that very much speaks to me personally in terms of aligning to my personal value set and purpose. But I think most importantly, the opportunity to come into an environment, open-mindedness, willing to invest in a transformation in the HR function so that we can be cutting edge, deliver market leading client solutions that really are going to set us apart from the market and really deliver impact. So, it's been an exciting journey, and obviously I'm far from out of the woods yet, but continuing on a very exciting journey ahead of me. Thanks.
No, that's an amazing journey. And I think it's so interesting that you spent that much time also learning about the business, because I think that is such a crucial piece. And to have got, personnel management, I actually haven't heard that for a while, but 100%, to move from that to the world of now employee experience, which even from a couple of years ago, which was quite an unknown term even, and now we're really starting to get traction in the space. And I know it's something that's very close to your heart, and you call it workforce experience at Nedbank. But tell me, what do you really enjoy about employee experience, and why does it matter to you?
Oh, Sally, look, I think that's a great question. I think the current environment that we're operating in, I think, has fundamentally shifted in the last few years post-COVID. I think it's important to highlight that the operating environment is just plagued by people risk. We are unable to keep a handle on our talent in this country, in this industry. Things have evolved so significantly. We're now fishing in in a global pond, but trying to compete for talent. So the war for talent is definitely influencing the way we operate and what we have to offer to our workforce. And I think similarly, that the environment is poised to differentiate those that will join your organization or won't, based on your attractiveness as an employer brand and ultimately the lived experience of your employees. So workforce experience is something which, in fact, it's been written about more recently, but I used to talk about it as what is the lived experience, right? The lived experience of the people that work for you. How does it feel to work there? Is it easy to work there? Is it hard? What is the environment like? And all of that comes into shaping, the decision to either shape a competitive workforce experience that is going to set you apart from your competitors or not. So it is incredibly important, I think, to focus on it, and it's multidimensional. Workforce experience isn't just one component or another. It's not just how people engage with their practices or a set of processes. It's actually quite multidimensional in nature.
It is incredibly nuanced, and I think that especially what you were saying around reducing the friction in workplace, in terms of how do we make it easy to do your job, that has to be part of your experience, as well as all of the the other elements, which is honoring your EVP and looking at all the different aspects which are going to make it great. We look at it in terms of rewards and community conversation, but function. Function is a huge part of it. It has to be easy to do your job. So, if we're looking at workforce experience, and we're talking about relationships and meeting people where they are, which is obviously a large part, how do you bring meaning to work and purpose to life in these big organizations and unlock discretionary efforts with the people that you're working with?
Wow. Well, look, I think for any successful organization, it's got to start with exactly that. How do you unlock discretionary efforts? So I think a couple of things. I think in the context of the world that our workforce experiences, I would say probably the first way to create meaning is really about ensuring that an employee comes to work and feels seen. Right? Now, the reality is, and I'm going to get to purpose a little bit later, but I think that meaning is so important because people, I think, for so long saw work as a place you went and you just simply drew a salary. And that was fine in the day where, in effect, manual work and a lot of sort of menial activity was happening. Certainly, I think with the influence of digitization, robotics, artificial intelligence, we have really eliminated a lot of the what I would call lower order activity, and therefore we require people to really engage in the work that they're doing. They're not simply packing boxes; they are thinking, conceptualizing, dreaming about the art of the potential. So it is important, I believe, that employees feel seen, they feel cared for, they feel acknowledged for the whole being, right? So I think that is probably one of the most important and potentially overlooked elements of workforce experience, where I think sometimes we focus on the more of the what I describe as the above the waterline elements, and I'll touch a little bit on those, I'm sure, a little bit later. But the reality is that how you create meaning is really through the individual, and it's tapping into the human and ensuring that they feel seen, they are in fact engaged by leadership. I think secondly, in the context of creating and bringing purpose to life, it's about matching the individual, so therefore understanding what makes that person tick and finding a way to be able to connect them to the organization's higher purpose. So if I speak specifically about Nedbank, and this is hugely close to my heart, we're an organization with our purpose of using our financial expertise to do good. And you might ask, well, how does that work in HR? Well, wow. I mean, how long is a piece of string?
Right? Yeah, where does it not work?
There is so much that we do that drives our decision making. So from the way you pay, the way you treat your staff, the way you invest in their future, right? The way you play a role in contributing to the society in which you operate, creating and playing a meaningful role in eliminating unemployment, are all elements that certainly are major focuses in my role. And so it's really about ensuring that we bring our purpose to life and we demonstrate the lived experience of using our financial expertise to do good. That doing good piece drives the way we make decisions. It's the way we prioritize, what is important in our strategy. And it really is seen and lived as a differentiator in our world. And for me, it is just really a true north. So that is about, that's incredibly important for our employees. If I think about the NASA example, about asking, I'm sure you know the example of a janitor being asked, when he was sweeping the floor of the warehouse, and being asked, what are you doing? And he said, I'm sending a man to the moon, right? And that was NASA's purpose, right? And every single employee's got to line up behind that. So the reality is about, I believe, using the line leader to tap into and engage employees first and foremost, so they feel that they can be their whole selves, and then allowing them to really engage with what does the organization stand for. And it's about marrying the two that I think is really where the magic happens.
I love that story. And, a few years ago, we were chatting with the then CEO of Eskom, which I don't think is ever an enviable position to be in. And he was saying, how there are a whole lot of gentlemen there that sweep the floor in the coal rooms. And, these are community leaders. These are people that, lead their churches and their communities. And they sweep up all the coal dust. And then as soon as the big next lump comes in, all the coal dust goes back in. And he was chatting to them, and they saying, how do you find purpose in this work that you do? And they said, well, we know that we are the reason that someone can learn at night, because we're helping to contribute that they have power to be able to see their school books, and we help to boil tea for the woman that's had a hard day, and they had really believed that, and that they were so linked to that purpose that doing that work had such incredible meaning. And I think that having that purpose really drives it when the days are tough. And I think for a lot of people at the moment, times and days are tough. So, when we talk about the desired workforce experience coming off the back of that, obviously we're looking at days are tough, but there is a desired workforce experience that should influence the user experience. And now I'd like to turn you back a little bit to the design of technology, but also to shape the other elements I mean, it's not just about the tech, it's not just about the purpose. It's also elements like policies and people practices. How do they all come together to create, a great user experience in terms of workforce experience? I know it's a complicated question, lots of parts, but
thank you, Sally. Look, I must say, you're spot on, right? I think so many organizations focus on the user experience and focus on technology only. Now, that's a really important part, right? So, but before I think you get into unpacking how the parts come together, I think you've got to start with, first of all, what motivates and engages your workforce, right? What are the things that create sludge for them, right? What are those things? What is the drag on their day, right? And really, I think appreciating what those needs and frustrations are so that you can try and solve for them. So I think that's certainly one part. I think secondly, it's incredibly important to equally marry your client experience, your desired external client experience, with your employee experience. Where a lot has been written about CX and EX, but I'm a firm believer that that is such an important relationship, because in a world where, and I'm going to again use Nedbank as an example, we certainly have embarked on a huge digitization journey, and really wanting to be at the forefront of being a deliver digital solutions to our clients, because they are easy to engage with, simple, intuitive. You can engage with them 24/7. The reality is you cannot offer that to your client and then ask your employees to come back and say, well, can you please fill in these 15 forms? And you're going to repeat the same information 5 times over, or if they're 15 forms, 15 times over. And that's okay, because you're sending them conflicting messages. So it is really important, I believe, to tap into what are the ways of engaging and motivating your workforce and what frustrates them. Solve those. Secondly, what is your client experience looking to achieve, and how do you make sure that the internal employee lived experience is really a mirror of that? So yes, technology in our world is a hugely important part of our workforce experience. And again, if I think about technology, it's not technology for technology's sake, right? It is, you've really got to think about your process design, your process re-engineering, and that starts with your policy. So you are spot on. I mean, I'll give you some frightening examples, which we are solving, I'm happy to say. So I'm going to use some examples that maybe don't, certainly will demonstrate why we need to make some shifts in our practices. But in essence, if you had to, a few years ago, if you had to apply for leave at Nedbank, you would have had to know the difference between statutory leave and discretionary leave. Now, if you have to go in and ask an employee, even if it is an automated digitized process, to go in and determine what is, from a drop-down menu that is so complicated, how do I determine what the leave is that I'm actually applying for? They just want to go on vacation, right? So it's got to be made a whole lot simpler. And that starts, therefore, with the way you design your policies, right? You should never have a set of policies that are so complicated that you require an employee to take out a dictionary, have to walk around with the user manual so that they can comply with what is required. If you're talking simple, intuitive, and easy to engage with, so your policies need to be simple, intuitive, and easy to engage with, and they've got to make sense. They've got to achieve, they've got to be designed with outcomes in mind. So the outcome, the form that you touched on earlier, is so incredibly important that it matches the function. And so that's really something which I know sounds so simple in words, but it is actually quite difficult to achieve and requires a lot of re-engineering of people practices and processes in order to achieve it, right? So I think equally, if you think about this world that we live in our personal lives, we can do banking anywhere, anytime, right? You can lie in bed at night, do a transfer, pay somebody. A bad banking experience is when you want to go and talk to somebody in a branch because you've had to stand in a line, etc. The reality is you want to be able to deal with your needs digitally, and equally, if where you get stuck, you want to be able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody fairly immediately. You don't want to have to wait until the bank opens at a certain time to be able to go and get an issue resolved. And our people practices have got to be designed on the same principles. The reality is that our workforce is living in a world of, always on. So they need to be able to access their tools and the solutions that they need to engage with when they want to, not when we want them to. So the principle of 24/7 is very important. And then equally, the principle of designing for self-service, because again, if you just think about the simple examples of your iPhone, right? When you got an iPhone, it didn't come with a manual, right? You kind of figured it out. Why? Because it was simple, it was intuitive. So when you're designing your people processes, or any form of process that your employees engage with, it has to be intuitive. It has to be, they can't have to sit there with the manual to be able to determine what they have to do next, because that just, if you're doing that, it's first of all, it slows them down, and it's an element of frustration. So it really is about designing for function, making sure that what you're putting in front of your workforce is what they need in order to fulfill an outcome, and lead with those principles in mind. And that shapes everything from the way we engage and design our technology, the way we engage and design our policies, our people practices, pretty much any solution, really. It's incredibly important that those principles guide what we do. And you see the value proposition holistically, because you can design beautiful tech and tech for tech's sake, or you can design tech for function. And equally policy, goes hand in hand with that. So just very important ingredients in workforce experience.
I think what's interesting about the iPhone example as well is, with an iPhone, over time, you start to personalize it, right? You start to put on your set of apps and the things that speak to you. And I think very much the same way that the expectation of employees now is that things should start to be personalized towards me, because I am giving you my data. Again, mirroring the customer experience, as I start to give you my information, the offer of exchange is that then you will start to offer me tailor-made things that suit my specific needs. And I think that's really where I'm seeing a big shift this year specifically, is starting to look at really understanding the aspect and the expectation of employees when it comes to the personalization of the user experience. Are you seeing the same?
Spot on. So I think that's really a great lead into to a really good example. I think if you think about if for every employee that you have in your organization, even if you have, and I'm going to use some basic examples, a banking teller, right? If you have 500 banking tellers, the reality is you have 500 individuals who have unique aspirations, unique abilities, and dreams and hopes for their future. And it is about ensuring that we have a look at the individual. We don't blanket everyone and assume you're a teller, therefore your career path will be X.
Yes.
So what we're seeing is the growing need to, first of all, obviously leveraging a foundation platform of your job architecture, understanding what are people's core skills and capabilities today, but actually starting to integrate the way we look at our employees, leveraging different pieces of information that we hold on them, right? So, for example, when an employee does online learning in their own time, or even in their, during their lunch hour or in the evenings, whenever they, catching up on acquiring new skills, it's important to be able to understand what it is that they are learning, right? Because sometimes they are brushing up on a process or a practice that they need for their current day job, but they may be acquiring skills for the future, right? So it is about understanding what are people investing in their personal time to grow and develop themselves, and seeing themselves as, not just in the role that they're in. It's about understanding the individual in the context of their performance track record, right? What have they done in the past? How have they performed? Equally, how do their colleagues see them, right? So in the context of recognition, we've got a 360-degree process in Nedbank where colleagues who recognize excellence in one of their counterparts can make a nomination for recognition. And it's by pulling the various components of what becomes the employee profile together, you start to see the uniqueness of one individual compared to another. And I think so it has two benefits. One, it allows, if we start to understand what is the employee's future aspirations for their careers, What is their potential based on the psychometric profile and assessments that they did on coming into the organization? What are their learning aspirations, or what are they investing in terms of developing their skills over time? It actually starts to reshape how we then send, how we have our digital solutions, digital learning being pushed to them, designed for their specific needs, their specific interests, their aspirations, right? So that's certainly a way of meeting the individual at a personal level. It's not just about saying, blanket set of training you need to go on, this is what you need to do. It's about ensuring that the individual is being fed with what actually fuels their motivation and their needs. And equally in the context of the technology that we're designing for line managers, what I think is important is to appreciate the need for integration of data, right?
Yeah.
So if I think about in the past where we would have been, we've certainly relied upon, I would say, data designed that is recorded screen upon screen, almost like an onion, right? You have to click through 15 screens to get a full picture of somebody. Well, the reality is that means that as a line manager, you've got to go and fetch a view of the person's recognition, and fetch a view of the person's learning interests, and fetch a different view of the individual's career aspirations from different parts of your ERP. And I think it's really today where what we are really trying to push is integrated talent profiling, so that a line manager can look at a dashboard and an employee, and they can see what is their leave record recently. Have they taken leave, right? Because that's a very good indication of engagement. What are their career aspirations? Because that's on a dashboard. Looking at what are their recent 4 or 5 most recent individual learning time that they what have they done to invest in new skills? How are they? What is their performance track record over the last 3 years look like? If you start to see it in a blended way, all of a sudden you start to get a better picture of your employee. And I want to go back to the example that I used around things like leave, right? Yeah. Leave is not necessarily just an indication that somebody is tired, they need to go on holiday. It is also an indication of how they feel about their role, right? If they're taking extraordinary amounts of sick leave, it's about understanding, okay, hold on, this person is taking sick leave. Either they really have got a really sort of problematic health issue, or actually are they disengaged, right? So it is about pulling various components of data together in such a way that they can be consumed simply, easily, and in an integrated way that starts to tell you a fundamentally different story. And we record so much information. It's about how you package that information, put it in the hands of decision makers, put it in the hands of line leaders. And that really is what ultimately then shapes a fundamental shift and enhancement to the workforce experience.
Absolutely. And I mean, the power of data-driven decision-making cannot be underestimated. But I think what the person on the other side of that experiences is going back to, they feel seen, because you are seeing much more of who they are and able to have conversations that count, conversations that really matter. But I want to backtrack you a little bit here, and I want to ask you a little bit about the role of HR, because how do you think the role of HR has evolved to meet these new and more complex business needs today?
Well, I think it has changed significantly, Sally. Again, I'm going to probably start with my reference to personnel management, which I'm very, very happy to say has died a death. But the reality is that HR very much has got to be that commercial business partner, right?
Yeah.
Because they can no longer be reliant on being required to fill in forms, follow strict, process, paint by numbers. The world that we live in has changed, right? As I described earlier, artificial intelligence, the use of technology and digitization has really eliminated a lot of that. And so I'd say that for the HR business partner today, it really is about tapping into, where is the business at? Where are the biggest business risks from a human capital perspective? What needs to change? How do we anticipate the needs of the future of our organization and plan for that? Because it's far more of a diagnostic role today. The diagnostician is really the ones that separate themselves from you know, as standout performers. Ability to diagnose, ability to strategize, ability to anticipate needs of the organization ahead of demand, right? And not just conceptualize, but equally be able to operationalize solutions. So the role has changed fundamentally. I think that it is a more commercial enabler than it has ever been. And certainly, you know, if I just distill my role today to its bare basics, what is my primary function? My primary function is to ensure that the organization I represent has this access to the skills and capabilities it needs today, tomorrow, and for the future. And that is ultimately about risk management. And when you distill it to that perspective, it gives you a different lens on what it is that we're here to achieve and how we approach our roles, because we have to be able to secure access to the capabilities our organizations be able to need to be successful and be competitive into the future.
And I think it's, you know, it's such a nice segue into talking a little bit around, I mean, the skill supply chain. You know, given that global war for talent at the moment is huge. I was chatting with some colleagues in Nigeria, and they were talking about, there's a phrase they call JAPAD, and you say, you know, this person's JAPAD to Canada or to the UK, and I know that they're looking for other opportunities, and specific skill sets are definitely being targeted. So I think there's a lot of pressure on organizations at the moment, and I'm interested to know how your organization is responding to this challenge, and what are the positives you see for the employee experience in this approach?
Well, I think there can only be upside for the employee experience, and I'll tell you why. I think, first of all, it starts with, are you an attractive place to work, right? So what is your employer brand? I don't think you can underestimate. Gone are the days where you just thought that in small communities, word of mouth would really, you know, help you to fill your vacancies. We are so much more diverse, so much more distributed in terms of locations, how people work, where they work, when they work. So the reality is you're now operating on a global scale. And so you've really got to elevate your employer brand. And that comes with not just telling people about what you are and who you are and what you stand for, but equally the mirror has got to be the lived experience. So it comes back to that workforce experience fundamentally. But a huge investment's got to go into, I believe, elevating the employer brand, making yourselves attractive. I think equally, it then fundamentally shapes the workforce experience, because what you have got to be able to do is you've got to be able to demonstrate flexibility. You've got to be able to meet the individuals where they're at. So if you're wanting to tap into global talent pools, you've got to be able to offer a competitive experience where people can work certain times of day that work for them, right? You've got to be able to offer them experiences where, in effect, what they do is and how they engage with their leadership is through really, you know, well-considered line manager to employee engagements, right? Where the individual can, even if they're sitting in a different time zone, engage regularly with their line leader, to feel part of the team. It fundamentally changes how you practice what your day looks like, and what you put in place to be able to enable those engagements. It equally shapes the way you use technology, and again, it's got to be about function rather than form, and equally the entire element of, you know, policy and people practices have got to be considered so that they are that much more attractive and user friendly, simple, intuitive, and mirror that, you know, that brand aspiration that is being sold in the external market. If you have an inauthentic brand, I think that it can be hugely problematic. I think, you know, what you say to organizations or say about your organization out there has got to be the lived experience. And if it's not, people very quickly, you know, vote with their feet, because they can. Those individuals with key skills really do have a huge, you know, have a huge amount of opportunities outside. And as an organization, we have to see ourselves as delivering a more competitive outcome for our workforce, not just our clients. It can't just be the client. It's got to be client and employee. That's got to become equally important, and it's got to drive our priorities. And therefore, it is about making sure that what we do and what we, certainly my focus is to make and create the most attractive environment for our individuals, or for our employees, so that they stay at Nedbank. And if they choose to leave, that resonance of a great experience is wow. One which shaped them to grow, shaped them to be future fit, gave them access to great leadership and a great culture. And therefore, actually, when the going gets tough where they are, or maybe they realize maybe the grass wasn't so green on the other side, a lot of them come back, right? So that's a testament to a good workforce experience. And therefore, coming all the way back to your question, what it means is for employees I see today is they are definitely in a far more positive position. They are no longer, exploitation is dead. For us to compete, it is all about making sure that we deliver on an attractive experience and really delight the user, which is the employee as well as the client.
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, if you don't have a Glassdoor strategy in place, if you're not looking at where people can go and find information about your organization, it doesn't create a great experience. And that's where people go. They want to know what it's like to work there. And they'll find out,
Yeah.
So as you say, if you're fronting it and it's an inauthentic brand and you're literally putting up staging the workplace experience, you'll be found out very quickly, and people won't touch that. So it is, I think, really, really a great thing for the employee experience, because people are investing and organizations are really turning that focus inwards, which I think is hugely, I obviously love it because it's something that I enjoy, but it's hugely important, and I think it's so great to see. Deb, you've spoken about a lot of things today, and you've come with this wealth of experience. There are a lot of people that are entering the industry, specifically in Africa, and that's a big focus of the Future EX, is providing a bit of a resource and a bit of a space for people to learn from people like you. What is your advice for somebody that's entering employee experience and working with people at the moment? What is your piece of advice to them?
I'm probably going to repeat what I've said a little bit earlier. It's got to be about focus on, certainly focus on function, right?
Okay.
The reality is that ultimately, and how you do that is you've got to understand your organization. You've got to understand the market you're operating in. You've got to understand what you're competing with in the skills. And therefore, you've got to design with the consumer in mind, the individual, the user of the solutions that you're putting in place. Obsess about understanding that, because if you understand their need has got to drive the solution. And it cannot simply be that we're putting glossy veneer on, as I say, tech for tech's sake, or policy for policy's sake, which we still see so much of, right? It is about, it's about the individuals tapping into what is the need of the organization, really getting under the skin of the environment, understanding what the workforce really is looking to experience, what their needs are, what their motivators are, what those sludge points are, and really keeping that in mind as you look to design, whether it's policy, practice, technology, whatever it might be, or even culture, that is going to unlock the discretionary effort in the workforce.
What do you think are the best ways of uncovering that? Do you think it's down to like walking the floor? Do you think it's around voice of employee, all of the above? What are some of the tools that you would recommend that they look at?
Well, I think the reality is that it is about, first of all, understanding the business, right? So I think you can talk to employees, but I think if you aren't on the floor, if you aren't getting to press the flesh, and that's hard, right? In a far more hybrid work model that we have,
yes,
and we all practice today. But it is about understanding the experience that of them. What are our employees experiencing day to day, right? And it is about making sure that whether it is, if I think back to my time where I've learned probably the most, getting out in front of a client, going and asking, can I come and sit with you? Can I go to a client visit, right? And that is where you really start to understand the bigger picture, understanding what that looks like. Equally, when you are in interviews, asking the right questions. What do you learn? What you learn from interviews is absolutely fascinating. From what was their experience at their prior organization, what are the pain points that they're wanting to run from, what are the things that they really enjoyed, what works for them, what doesn't. It's, you can tap into it in multiple ways. I would just say be curious, right? So whether it is engaging with somebody once they're in the organization or on the way in, understanding the client, understanding what the market says about us as an organization, all of those elements contribute to shaping your understanding of the lived experience of the employee, right? And that's why I go back to the CX-EX. You cannot say, well, we're going to create a great experience for our workforce that simply doesn't reflect what we're trying to offer to our clients, unless it's super attractive and your client experience is not great and it's catching up. But it's very seldom that is the case. So it really is about all of those elements that I think are important. And it is really about, I think, just the curiosity. And equally, I think reading, right? I draw a lot from drawing from industry podcasts, participating in symposiums, getting to conferences, reading, just Harvard Business Review, or are there millions of publications out there? I think it is the curious mind that will solve for workforce experience, right? But it's about getting to the root cause. It's getting to the root of user experience. It's not staying in the veneer. And I think that's what really fundamentally differentiates, average design from great design.
So conversation and curiosity, if I have to simplify it down.
There we go.
Thank you, Deb. And I appreciate your time so much today. And unfortunately, you have piqued my curiosity. I know that I could ask you questions all day, and I don't think that would ever be sated. But thank you so much for sharing so much of your experience with us today. I really appreciate the time. And I look forward to maybe catching up again with you in the future and finding out what other great things you've managed to accomplish.
Thanks so much, Sally. Go well.
Thank you. And then that's it. And thank you so much, Deb. And Rashi, thank you.